systems.
So they must have given him quite a bit of credibility.
They did give him a great deal of credibility.
Was there any retribution that the Japanese enacted as a result?
No, there's no retribution on the Japanese or by the Japanese.
By the Japanese, yeah. I
No.
mean, because obviously what Phil's saying is that we blew off an atomic bomb that caused the earthquake, right?
That's exactly correct.
Now,
there was a tactical nuke in the harbor, which was planted by, as he said, Navy SEALs. And it followed a long argument between the United States government and Japan over the fact that Japan was the world's leader in synthetic intelligence computer technology. And all of it centered in Kobe.
Right. So, what happened with the executives?
That's an unknown, to me anyway.
Yeah.
Kobe was leveled, and particularly the building which contained most of the research for this was leveled.
Mm-hmm.
And he told me that 70% of the Japanese scientists working on synthetic intelligence computer systems were living in Kobe and were working on that project there, and it was leveled. And that put them out of business, and the U.S. government probably, whatever elements in the government, it can't accuse the whole government, it's certain sections within it, probably felt satisfied. There was no repercussions that I know of, but at the same time, those executives learned what Phil had to say regarding the facts of what happened, and what may have happened after that, I have no idea.
Okay, and about what day again was this? What was the date when he was actually flown to Japan? Was it 94 or 95?
It was in 95, after he had gone public. And I would say it was in the fall months, but I'm not sure of the dates.
Okay.
Because Phil died, murder by suicide, if you will, on or about the 10th of February of 1996.
Right.
It was just before he was going to go to the Global Sciences Congress in Florida, that winter Congress.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's go back before we get into his death.
Right.
You again, had a lot of contact with Phil. And didn't you spend...
We spent a lot of time with him, going around lecturing, particularly that period when we were in Cordy Lane in the hotel there, sponsored by a woman who is now dead. She brought a lot of people in, lecturing all over.
But didn't you share a hotel room with him?
Yeah, shared a room with him.
Did he share any other information?
Yes, he did.
With you besides what we are going to see on the CD, on the videotapes?
He mentioned Area 51, and a very interesting incident that occurred out there. He had business during the time when he was working for the government to go out to Area 51 periodically and see some particular officer in the, I think he said the Air Force, I'm not positive now, rather high rank, on business related to what he was doing. And in this one particular day, he said when you went out there, you went in, and you went into the outer office, and a Marine guard there says, Mr. So-and-so is not ready to see you right now. Please have a seat in his office. Oh, and by the way, just keep your eyes straight ahead. Don't look from side to side, and when he's ready, he will call you. Of course, tell that to Phil, and he's going to have other ideas. What is it they don't want me to see? So he let his eyes wander, and he saw a window, probably one of those slanting windows, where he could see through partially. It was a dark-colored glass. He could see through partially and see that there was somebody behind that glass. Eventually, he got to talk with the person he was to meet and talk with, what his business was and so on, and took care of that. And then he asked the guy, he says, there's a smoked glass window out there on the other side of your office. What's this all about? He said, oh, that's one of our guests. I said, one of your guests? What do you mean? He says, one of the guests of the government. And what do you mean, guests of the government? He says, oh, that's one of the aliens we keep around. Aliens? Yes. What do you mean? He says, well, we have a few guests, you know, from the UFOs that have come down and so forth. He said, we got a reptilian in there. He says, we've had him here for months. We've been trying to get him to talk. We can't. He says, he won't talk with anyone. So Phil looks at the officer and he says, why don't you let me try? The guy looks at Phil and says, you? He says, what makes you think he'll talk with you? He says, I don't know. Why don't you give it a try? He says, well, everybody else has failed. Why not? So he was prepared for this. He said, this is a special room. It's got special atmospheric mixture for him and a temperature of 123 degrees F. You have to go in a suit, an air-conditioned suit and so forth. And you have microphones and speaker and all of the appropriate. And
you're saying the reptilians can't live in this atmosphere?
Oh, they can. But this guy was being kept in the atmosphere which was more normal to what he was experiencing, would normally experience. They kept him in an atmosphere which was essentially the same as his home atmosphere.
And where was his home?
That was not mentioned to me.
Okay.
So Phil went in there, and he said he was in there 20 minutes, 30 minutes. This guy, when I say guy, I assume it was a male, started coming out with a bunch of pips and squeaks and high-pitched sounds. Now, being that this creature was about 6 foot tall, one would expect a lower voice. But if you have some rare gas mixtures, such as argon, helium, whatever, it's common knowledge, of course, if you put a human in a high helium mixture,
they sound funny.
They sound funny. Their voice goes up in frequency because the propagation rate through the gas is a much higher rate than normal air.
So is that the problem?
That was apparent part of the problem. So eventually Phil did get to talk with this creature, and they exchanged some thoughts and ideas. He was trying to speak in English, but it didn't come out very well.
Because of the gas in the room.
Because of the gas and so forth. Perhaps he didn't know the language that well. I do not know the reasons. But eventually talked with him.
Okay, so Phil actually got them to change the gas?
I don't know whether they did that or not.
Okay.
But in any case, Phil reported back to the officer later. He says, yeah, I got this guy to talk and such and such and such. Well, at the time when Phil admitted this to me, I asked him, I said, what did the guy tell you? What did he talk about? He says, don't feel comfortable about talking about that at this time. He never did tell me. But he got a permanent assignment for 3 months there as the official interpreter for this alien. And nobody else could talk with him, except this guy would talk with Phil.
Wow.
So what information came out of that, who knows?
It's too bad. It's too bad.
The government was trying, of course, to interrogate all of these captured aliens that were still alive and find out where they're from, what they were doing here, and whatever they could get out of them. And apparently it was a fairly successful program, because I know one other person who was on the lecture circuit for some years, Dean Stonier's up in Denver, who was lecturing about the aliens and admitted openly that he spent 7 years in the Pentagon on special projects related to UFOs. I happened to wander in on his lecture was going, because he had the door open, and I looked on the podium. He had notes on the podium. This is a friend of mine. I'm not talking about Phil. I'm talking about somebody else later. And all alien text. I looked at this alien text, and I says to my friend, I didn't know you could read this stuff. He looked at me and says, what do you think I did for 7 years in the Pentagon? And I said, oh.
Who is this?
I don't know if I should mention his name. I know who he is and all that, but he's now out of the circuit. But
was he a speaker?
He was the speaker. He was the speaker.
Well, then it'd be public information.
Basically, yeah. He was the nephew of a famous admiral who went to the South Pole back in 1947, Admiral Byrd. This was Admiral Byrd's nephew. His name at the moment escapes me, but it can be traced.
Okay.
But in any case, I found that curious because here was more evidence of alien language text. There has been a great deal of communication with aliens by certain elements of our government, the secret government. Right. And Phil was involved with this for some 3 months.
Did Phil know who this quote-unquote secret government is? Did he know the people? Because he talks about his security clearance.
Yes.
I forget the name of it, something 3, that he had this very high-level security clearance.
Yeah, this got into an interesting point of contention later, not with Phil and between Phil and myself. It was a peculiar clearance, and it was related to one of the gemstones. They had a had a gemstone level of clearance. There were several levels of gemstones and several numbers, and he had one of these clearances, plus some other level which came out of the Pentagon.